So I watched The Rings of Power, and I have a bit to say about it. Before I continue, I want to put a disclaimer here, which probably kind of differentiates me from everyone else watching this. I am not a Lord of the Rings fan. I don't know any of the lore. I don't know any of the canon. I don't really know any of that. The only thing that I did was watch the movies. I watched the 3 Lord of the Rings movies in the trilogy, and that was pretty much it. And they came back out in the early 2000s, and I haven't watched them since. So that's why I wanted to give my thoughts on this, because I think I have a different perception of this than many people who are on YouTube reviewing this right now. So a lot of people are watching this Rings of Power, and if you're like a hardcore lore fan, if you're a really big fan of Lord of the Rings, you probably don't like it. But then there's also some people out there, and they all say it's a 10 out of 10 world-changing massive blockbuster hit that you have to see. But like I said, I don't have any skin in the game. I can totally be unbiased from either side. But I just want to know what this was like, because there's so much hype around it, but then there's also so much controversy surrounding it. I just want to see what was going on. But with that being said, I know my review and thoughts on this are probably going to piss some people off, so that's totally fine. If you dislike that, then just dislike the video right now. It's not going to hurt me. It's going to be okay. And let me just say that before we begin, I understand why some people are upset, because I know that this show doesn't follow the canon of the Lord of the Rings series, the canon that Tolkien laid out. I get that. I can understand why you're upset about that. Because trust me, I watched the Halo TV series, and that was trash. That was absolute garbage. But that also had bad writing, had bad characters, it had a terrible pace. It just sucked in a lot of other aspects besides going against the canon. But regardless, I understand. But first things first, I want to go through episode 1. I don't know how much I could show without getting unrightfully copyright striked by Amazon, so maybe I'll just show some pictures over here and some little clips. We'll see what happens. So I will say that episode 1 starts off fantastically. So it starts off with this prologue, and the shots and the cinematography and the CGI, it's all stunning. It all looks amazing. It's really, really well done. Props to whoever did that. And I know that this is a common thing. If you go to any of the reviews or any people talking about this on Twitter who are looking at it in like a positive light, even people that are looking at it negatively, they'll say that the cinematography is really, really good. So first we're introduced to Galadriel, who is the main character of the series, so to speak. There's a lot of other characters, but she seems to be the main one. And we find her in Valinor, which is like the realm of the elves, is where all the elves live. And we're introduced to her and her brother Finrod. Everything's going great. This place like literally looks like heaven. But then this guy called Morgoth attacks with his army of orcs, and then they take the light from this place that the elves live, and they kind of just ruin it. So we go from this place that's like literally heaven on earth, and then Morgoth attacks with his orcs, and then it just turns into this like horrible wasteland darkness. So then all the elves go from Valinor to Middle-earth. And then there's a war between the elves and the people of Middle-earth against Morgoth and all these orcs, and a lot of people die. A lot of elves die, and we see Galadriel go through all of this, and she witnesses all these people die, all these battles, all this death, all this destruction. And I want to talk about this because there's this really cool shot where Galadriel picks up like this elf warrior soldier helmet, and then she puts it on this huge pile that's just like thousands of helmets of all these dead soldiers. But one thing I noticed is that like the helmet is like made to be look like metal, but it's like plastic. It like kind of bends, and it kind of just like took me out. I'm like, this is clearly like a mistake. I'm really surprised that no one caught it, because seriously, look at it. It like kind of bends, but whatever. So then after all this, there's all these wars and stuff between Morgoth and the orcs and the elves, but then the elves become victorious and they defeat Morgoth, and then the war is over. But then this guy Sauron, who I know from the movies, he is alive, and he is a loyal follower of Morgoth, and he takes the orcs and he leads them. And then Finrod gets wind of this and finds out that Sauron is still out there, and there's still all this evil and these orcs out there. So then Finrod says, hey, I'm going to stop this guy. But then what do you know? Sauron kills him. So Sauron kills Galadriel's brother Finrod, and then he puts this like sigil on him, like Sauron burns his sigil into Finrod. And Galadriel sees this, and then she wants to take up the mantle. She wants to go and find Sauron for herself and kill him. So that is kind of the whole prologue. There's that war, then they find out that Sauron's still alive, Sauron kills Finrod, and then Galadriel wants to find Sauron and kill him for good. So this is the whole background to her character, and I totally get why she is the way that she is, why she's obsessed with finding Sauron. It makes a lot of sense, because she's seen all of her people die, she's seen her brother die to him. It makes sense that she's obsessed with finding him and ending him. So that's kind of her whole story, and then we go to the present time in this show, and she has been looking for Sauron for centuries, apparently. And she has this, like, band of other elves with her. But all these guys, like, don't really want to be with her, and they're like, hey, can we, like, kind of stop doing this? We've been searching for, like, hundreds of years, and, like, we never found him. Like, he's probably gone. It's over. Just give it up. But Galadriel's like, no, we got to go find him. And then it turns out in the show, they actually find this hideout or this castle or fortress, whatever you want to call it, of Sauron. So they do go into this stronghold, and then they find Sauron's sigil on, like, an anvil in there. But it turns out that it's probably been from a long time ago, and like no one's having it except Galadriel's like, oh yeah, he's like right here, he's still alive, but everyone's like, no, no, probably not. But then out of nowhere, this troll comes and attacks everyone. So everyone that Galadriel's with, all these soldiers like get their asses handed to them. They get like completely destroyed, which makes sense because it's just like a giant troll. But then Galadriel comes in and she does this like leap off like a friggin' sword, and then she's doing like all these like fancy like overly flashy moves, and she kills this giant troll with like no effort and like no difficulty whatsoever. And then like this whole part is like weirdly brutal because like she cuts the troll's like jaw in half, and it's like dangling there and it's like bleeding and stuff, and then he's like down on his knees, and then she like takes her dagger and just stabs him in the skull with it. Like it's kind of brutal, and I'm like, who is this for? Is this like aimed at like younger audiences? I mean, like this is kind of brutal, so it's probably not. I don't know. I was just kind of confused at that point. But then what makes me question even more is that after she annihilates this troll, all of her soldiers that are with her are like, yo, we're done. Like we're not doing this anymore. We're gonna go home, and you could do this yourself. You could find Sauron yourself and whatever. But I'm like, what? Why are you gonna leave her? Because like you clearly need her help. Like she just saved everyone. She just saved all your asses. Like why you should probably stay with her for like a little bit until you get home. But whatever. But so I kind of looked into this because I'm like, is Galadriel like really this powerful? Is she doing like some kind of weird women boss thing that they like injected into the show? But as it turns out, I look back at the Lord of the Rings movies and some clips of her. She actually is kind of OP in the movies. So like, I don't know how that lines up with this timeline, but there you go. It's just something I found. So then we go to this next scene where we're introduced to the Harfoots, and these guys are actually a species of hobbits, which I didn't know at the time. I thought they were just hobbits because they look like hobbits, but they're Harfoots. I looked it up. I looked up the Wikipedia article. I will say I did like the introduction of the Harfoots because like it was kind of cool the way that they set up their camp. So these two hunters are like passing by, and the Harfoots see them, and they all go into hiding. And then once the two hunters like pass by in this field and they're way out of the way, all the Harfoots like come out and like their camps, like they expand their camps and they like set up all their stuff again. They come out of hiding. It was pretty cool. And like it makes sense why a race like that would live like that, because like they're tiny and small, and there's probably a lot of things in this world that could kill them. So it makes sense why their camps would be like collapsible and like easily backup expandable just like that, because they need to hide. I get it. So then we skip right out of that. We just get introduced to them quick, and then we go back to Galadriel. Galadriel meets with Elrond back in Lindon, where all the elves live in Middle-earth, and she comes back with the news of the sigil that she found, and she says Sauron's still out there. Elrond's not having it. He's like, just forget about it, go back home, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, there's this whole ceremony where Galadriel and all of her soldiers that have been following her for centuries looking for Sauron, they meet with the elf king, the high elf. I forget what it was called. But anyway, they have this ceremony, and like the elf king, whatever his name is, I'm very sorry right now. I know a lot of people are getting pissed off at me. I think they call him the high elf. Anyway, he has this whole ceremony for them, and he's like, oh, hey, look at, they came back, Galadriel and her company came back, and like Sauron's no longer there. They searched the ends of the earth, they can't find him. So as a grand prize, Galadriel, you and your company, you could go back home. You go back to Valinor. You get the grand prize passage of going home. So Galadriel's obviously pissed off, but at the end she gets convinced to go back home for whatever reason. So then Galadriel and her company, they all load up on the boat to go back to Valinor, and the shot looks kind of weird. I can't really put my finger on it, but like if you've seen the show, you know what I'm talking about. This shot looks kind of off. So then we go back to another character, and like you'll notice this, you kind of jump around a lot in this. So we're introduced to another guy called Arondir. Arondir is an elf who's stationed in the Southlands, like as a watchman out there, and the Southlands is like where the humans live. So he's going there just to check out what's going on. There's some nice casual racism thrown in this whole bar scene, and then it's implied that he's banging this girl called Bronwyn. Bronwyn has this son named Theo. I have to say, while I was watching this, for some reason I just didn't really care about these two characters, but it is what it is. They're just not super likable. I don't know what it is. I just wasn't pulled into their story as much as I was with Galadriel. Anyway, to make a long story short, the only thing that these guys do is that they find this cow that this guy brings to him, and the cow is like corrupted. He has like this black goo milk coming out of him. And then they ask, hey, where was this cow? And they're like, oh, I think it was over in Horden. I think that's where it was grazing. So Arondir and Bronwyn are like, oh, we got to go there. We got to find out what's going on. So at the end of this episode, we're kind of rapidly switching between three different people: Arondir and Bronwyn, Galadriel, and the Harfoots. So Arondir and Bronwyn find Horden, which is completely destroyed, and then the Harfoots have a meteor crash into them, which is just some guy. And then Galadriel, as she's finally sailing home, this huge gate's opening up, this like weird magical gate to get them back into their homeland. She just jumps off the ship in the middle of the ocean for pretty much no reason. I'm not gonna lie, like this part actually made me laugh. I was just thinking like, what are you doing? If you really wanted to go back, and hunt Sauron, couldn't you like wait till you got there and then say, hey, I'm gonna take a ship back to Middle Earth? Or you just could have not gotten in the first place. I think this is probably the worst choice you could have possibly made. So anyway, that was episode 1. Other than the few points that I mentioned, I actually kind of did enjoy this episode. I liked the world building of it. I liked introducing all the characters. I like some characters more than others. But overall, it was a decent episode. And of course, the cinematography was top notch. I can't say that enough. And as someone with no knowledge of the canon, I was just interested to see where it was going. But that's where it all ended for me because episode 2 was not that great. Let's just start with Bronwyn and Arondir because like I don't really care about them. Like I said in the beginning, I'm just not really interested in their characters. So anyway, they go to Horden. They find this hole in the ground. Bronwyn runs back to her town to say like, hey, Horden's gone. It was attacked. For some reason, no one believes her. No one buys her story. I don't know why she would lie. I don't know why they wouldn't believe her, but they just don't. So Bronwyn goes back to her house and finds her son Theo hiding, and it turns out there's an orc in her house because they dug a tunnel into her house. So anyway, they kill the orc. They take the head back to the townspeople. They say, hey, you believe me now? They're like, oh, crap, we better get out of here. And then Arondir gets caught or something. I don't know. That's pretty much their whole story, but they cut back and forth, and it takes a long time to really get there. And that really is a shame because I do like slow burns. I do like getting up to the point in like a slow, methodical fashion. But the problem is, we know what happens. We know why Horden was attacked. We know it was the orcs. I even know that without knowing any of the lore of Lord of the Rings. It just kind of makes the whole thing boring. The mystery is who attacked Horden. I know it was the orcs, but it just takes so long to get there, and no one's believing her. I don't know. It was just kind of frustrating for me. Okay, and then we go back to Nori and the Harfoots and all that stuff. So this guy crashed as a meteor down to Earth and left this like huge crater there, and Nori, the little Harfoot girl, finds her. Now this is kind of where I lost interest too, because like I don't know, it was just kind of weird and like kind of off-putting seeing Gandalf like that, because spoilers, the guy that crashed in this crater as like a meteor that fell down to Earth, it's Gandalf. So Gandalf's talking in this different language. It seems like he has PTSD. He's really freaked out. He sees like one of the Harfoot guys come up to him, and he's like freaking out and screaming, and all this wind is going around him, and he's using all these crazy powers, but it's just kind of weird. So anyway, I'll fast forward to like what actually happens, like the whole crux of this. Again, this takes like an hour to get there, but Nori and her friend are taking care of Gandalf, and then at the very end, Gandalf finds these fireflies and like talks to them and like puts them up in the sky as like little like stars kind of, and like Nori sees this and he's like, oh look, he's making a constellation in the sky. He can't talk to us, he can't speak our language, but like he's telling us something. So these fireflies like make a constellation, and then Nori's like, oh, he wants us to find that constellation, and she's like, I've never seen that before, but I think I know where to find it. And I'm like, I don't get that. I don't understand that. I don't know where it's going. I'm sure it has a payoff, but like at the time I was just like, whatever, this is whatever. So yeah, so I thought the whole Gandalf thing, how he was depicted in this, was kind of weird, and I'm like, this doesn't really like fit the movies. Like, I don't know if this is actually canon. I don't know if this is actually like part of the lore. So I texted my friend who is a huge fan of Lord of the Rings, and I texted him and I was like, hey, did Gandalf like ever crash down like a meteor like anywhere in the books or anything like that? And then he gave me like this huge like novel-sized response that gave me like the origin of Gandalf. And I have to say, the origin that he gave me, like that's actually from the canon, is super, super interesting. And I had no idea when I was watching the movies back when I was a kid. It actually made me want to read the books because it was that interesting. So compare that to what he told me to like what's happening in the show right now. They were two like very different things, and I think I'm more interested in what is happening in the actual canon, and it makes me want to read the books more than what I'm seeing in this show right now. So anyway, that's that. Now let's go back to Galadriel. So she's still swimming in the ocean like an idiot, and then she comes upon these like shipwrecked people. They're like all floating on this like little makeshift raft that they made. And they're all freaking out. There's probably like 5 or 6 people. So she crawls up onto the raft, and like everyone finds out that she's an elf. They pull her hair back. They see she's an elf. They're all humans, so they don't trust her. They throw her off of the raft. But then like out of nowhere, this huge worm sea creature like comes swimming through the ocean and then absolutely demolishes this raft that all these people are on, and pretty much everyone dies. And the funny thing is, Galadriel's just like swimming in the water. She sees all this stuff happen, and then out of the fog comes the one remaining guy on like a piece of the raft. And then he's just like, he just helps her up, and then he's just like, oh, hey, what's your name? Like, as if all these people just didn't die in front of him. He's like totally unfazed by it. And then they just like start having a conversation. It reminded me of like NPC behavior. Like an NPC in a video game just saw like someone die and like they just don't do anything about it. So they become kind of like semi-friends, or like they semi-trust each other. She says, hey, I want to find Sauron. The guy's like, well, I don't want to have anything to do with that. I don't care about you killing orcs or anything like that. I got my own plans. And that's pretty much it. And at the end of the episode, they come upon this boat and there's this shadowy figure who's on the boat looking down at them. And that's pretty much it. That's where that story goes in this whole episode. She jumps in the ocean, she finds a raft, and then a boat finds her. That's where we got in an hour. Okay, now it's time to talk about the only good part of this episode, the only part that I actually enjoyed. So we go back to Elrond. He's sent by the High King of the Elves. I'm sorry. I think it was the High King. I could go back to my notes, but I'm too lazy right now. Elrond is sent to meet Lord Celebrimbor. So this Lord Celebrimbor is like a great elven blacksmith, and he wants to create this tower that houses a forge in it, which could reach temperatures unseen by anyone on the planet. So Elrond says, hey, well, we need a huge workforce, and I think I know where to find it. Let's go ask the dwarves. So Elrond goes to find Durin, who is the king of Durin's folk. And Durin's folk is just this clan of dwarves that lives inside this one mountain. So Elrond goes, they don't let him in, and then he invokes this thing called the Rite of Sigyn Tarag. There was no way I was going to remember that. Anyway, all that means is Elrond could ask a favor of Durin, but they have to do a test of endurance between Durin and Elrond, and they pretty much just have to break rocks until one of them gives up. Elrond loses. But as it turns out, Elrond and Durin actually have a long history with each other. So Elrond loses and Durin escorts him out. So while Durin is escorting Elrond out, he says, hey, do you know why I'm pissed at you? It's because you missed my friggin' wedding, you missed the birth of my children, you missed all that stuff. So basically Elrond just wasn't a good friend to him, blah, blah, blah. So Elrond says, hey, I want to apologize. I want to meet your wife. I want to meet your kids. And I'm just going to talk to them. And I'm going to apologize. And then I'll be on my way. But when Elrond goes in to meet the wife and the kids and Durin's with them, it kind of turns into like a really like kind of lighthearted scene. Because the wife is very apathetic to Elrond. And he's like, oh, just let him in. He could have dinner with us. All that stuff. And this is actually kind of like a heartwarming scene. I actually kind of liked it. There were some funny parts there. Kind of reminded me of Gimli, where he gave like some comedic relief moments as a dwarf. It was just nice. I enjoyed it. So at the very end of this, Elrond just kind of convinces Durin to maybe help him. But that's pretty much it. Overall, this episode was mediocre at best. The only thing that I enjoyed, honestly, was the interaction between Elrond and Durin. The rest was just like, it's in here and then it's like gone. I don't even remember. I'm more interested now in them like building this huge tower forge than I am with Galadriel's story. I think Galadriel is the main character in this whole thing, but like, I'm less interested in her because she's like jumping off boats and stuff. She's like stuck in the ocean for like a whole hour. I'm just like, whatever. That's whatever. So in summary, as a normie looking from the outside in, who isn't a huge fan of Lord of the Rings, this was just kind of okay. Between two episodes, I enjoyed the first one a lot more. I liked the second episode with the dwarf plot, but that's pretty much all I like in that one. But I'm just not interested in Arondir. I'm not really interested in Galadriel right now. I'm just interested in Elrond and this huge tower forge thing. But again, it goes back to the fact that this doesn't follow the lore. So it was okay for me because I don't know the canon and I don't know the lore. So I can only imagine what it's like to a true fan of this series, seeing this happen and knowing that none of this follows Tolkien's works. So while it may not have impacted my enjoyment, I can understand how it would impact fans' enjoyment because I am just blissfully unaware. And that really begs the question that I was asking this whole time is like, who is this really made for? If you know the lore, then you know what's coming. But if you don't, I could see how you could easily get confused. If you've seen the Lord of the Rings trilogy, you could kind of get a semblance of what's going on. But there's so many jumping back between characters and so many introductions that it's easy to kind of get lost. And if you've never seen Lord of the Rings, then you're probably lost completely. I don't think you would enjoy this, honestly, if you did not see any of the Lord of the Rings movies. So this show kind of sits in like a confusing location for me of like just wondering who this is for. The one thing that came out of this that was good is that I got interested in reading the books, and that was because my friend sent me like this novel page text of the origin story for Gandalf. So that's good. I will probably read the books, honestly. I've always wanted to, and that kind of just like triggered me to say like, okay, I gotta buy this trilogy. So will I continue watching this? Well, apparently there's a lot more to it because they plan for 5 seasons, and I think only 2 are confirmed right now because they're gonna see how it's gonna do. I don't know if I'm really that interested, but I don't know. We'll see where it goes. I'm honestly like I'm kind of confused right now. I don't really know. But I think if I do, I'll probably give an overall review once season 1 is done, and I'll just give my overall thoughts and opinions on it instead of like going through this like whole summary thing. But anyway, guys, that's my summary and review. I'm sorry that if I pissed you off, then I apologize. I know I probably mispronounced a lot of people. I know I probably said a lot of things that didn't make any sense to a Lord of the Rings fan, but I do apologize for that. That's just my opinion on the show. If you didn't like it, I totally understand. If you did like it, I could get that too. I can understand that. Again, I'm just like, I hate to say it, I'm like being radically centrist about this, but like I'm kind of in the middle. I don't really know if I'm super interested to watch it more. I probably will, but if like by halfway it doesn't keep my interest, I'm just gonna stop watching it because again, I have no skin in the game and I don't really care. But anyway, guys, that's all I have to say. I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.